Payless Liquors hotline. These days, you can find his work at The Athletic. It is Stephen Holder that joins us now, talking all things Indianapolis Colts. How's your downtime, my friend?
Oh man, it's rapidly coming to an end, but I am savoring it.
I have told you this in person a couple of weeks ago when we happened to see each other downtown, and I talked about it on the show earlier. You do a great job with everything you do, and you know I feel that way about you. But I thought the stuff you did this offseason during mini camps and OTAs to try to explain what was important to people and really what you could make sense of such a low contact period. Job well done by you. I thought that was really fantastic stuff to read.
Oh, I appreciate that. I mean, and that's always the challenge, right? I mean, they're out there, there's stuff actually happening, but at the same time, the challenge is to not go too far with it, right, and not make too much of it. So it's always like this difficult balance to determine, okay, how much stock do I put in what I'm seeing, because this is football and underwear, right? But there are some things you can glean, and I think we did learn some things from the offseason. So I think they're set up for a really interesting training camp. We
probably have 10 to 15% of the questions that we had at this time a year ago about this franchise and about this team, but there are always questions, even for the great teams. So if I said, all right, question marks you have going to 2 weeks from now when we're seeing the guys in pads at Grand Park, what are the first couple of question marks that come to mind?
Well, look, I mean, I think the one of the first things that we can take away from this past offseason was that the Colts were not satisfied with their pass rush last year, right? I mean, clearly, they went out and they gave Justin Houston $23 million over 2 years, right? So that was an acknowledgement, like, we are not getting it done. And they weren't getting it done. They had an adequate pass rush. It was not a good pass rush by any measurement. So the question now is, okay, we think it's better, and they've obviously added other sort of ancillary pieces like Ben Banagoo, who could have a role, and they're hoping some of these other guys grow up who they drafted last year and the last couple of years. But, you know, look, we're projecting that right now. We need to see it. The pass rush, if it picks up, the pass rush, if they can generate a consistent pass rush, that has the opportunity to really transform this defense. And I think that really is what is going to help this team take the next step. They were very good on defense last year. I mean, surprisingly good, shockingly good. But really, to become that next level team they want to be, especially on defense, they have to have that pass rush. So for me, that's one of the bigger questions. Is it as good as we think it's going to be? And, you know, how much of a difference is that one guy, Justin Houston, going to be able to make? So that question for me still remains unanswered. I feel pretty positive about it, but we're still, as I said, we're still projecting that. And it's really critical to them being what they want to be. Go back and look at the other teams who have played this style of defense, and they got to the quarterback. Listen, Chris Ballard himself always talks about the Lovie Smith defenses he played with, or worked with, I should say, in Chicago. And what did those guys do? They terrorized your quarterback, right? So you got to be able to do that. If they can't do that, they're not going to be the type of defense they think they can.
All right, Stephen, you mentioned you have to, glorified football underwear and that kind of thing, and so you got to temper yourself a little bit. What story or what player did you have to temper your excitement the most about? Maybe one of these young kids that's coming in, or just where this team is? I know you got to play even keel, but you're still kind of a fan at some point. What are you most excited about seeing?
I'm just going to tell you now, I love me some Parris Campbell.
I knew it.
Right? I mean, that's a hard one. And I want to tell you something. I think I'm being influenced here, right? Okay, because Frank Reich is so giddy about this kid. And I think I may be taking my cues from him, maybe a little too much, and maybe letting him influence me. But there's no question. I think he has some real plans for this guy. And what the Colts are saying is that, look, we respect Ohio State, and they did a good job, but they're crazy. Why didn't they use this kid more? And it's not so much that he didn't have numbers. It's more about the way they used him, right? I mean, he had a very limited role in that Ohio State offense. And so the Colts now have thrown him all over the field, and they're looking around like, wait a minute, we thought he couldn't do these things. But as it turns out, he absolutely can. Now, it doesn't mean that on day one he's going to go out there and run the whole route tree and catch 9 passes. I'm not saying that, but they think over time he can be a guy who runs the full gamut, does everything in the route tree, runs all the routes, plays all the positions. I mean, they think he can do all of that. I mean, they're already sort of tinkering with him playing in different spots on the field. So that's not something I anticipated right away. We thought this guy would be strictly a slot receiver, and he probably will be initially, but I don't know that that's going to be the case in the long term. The other thing about Parris Campbell that I've said this before, probably on this show, but I have to repeat it because if I'm telling you, it's striking. And Joe, I don't know if you've met him, I think you have, but when you meet this kid, I think when you think slot receiver, you're expecting sort of a smallish guy to walk in the room. And then he walks in and he's like 6'1" and like 215, and he's muscles popping out of places that there shouldn't be. And you're like, wait a minute, oh, this is a big dude. And so he's a huge guy. He looks bigger than he's even listed. Okay, I was stunned when I met him. I was like, oh, this is not some little scat back type of receiver here. The kid is big. He's a monster, and so to have that to have a guy that size running 4.3, legitimately 4.3, is just terrorizing.
You never want to compare these guys to somebody else, but the whole story, like what you just said, hiding guys in college or not getting their full potential because you got all these other guys that are playing. Can he be a Michael Thomas type player?
I think that's possible. Look, I mean, that's not going to be what he is right now because he's never been asked to do the things that Michael Thomas can do. So we'll have to see. I mean, and the question will be, can he accept that challenge, right? But when you think about the size and the speed, those are two attributes that they have in common. And I think that's where the Colts have to find out, what is his ceiling? Because we don't know. They have no idea what his ceiling is. And they have a feeling that Parris Campbell's ceiling might be damn high, but right now it's just sort of a theory, right? But I don't think it's not based on nothing, okay? It is certainly not based on nothing. They're seeing this guy, they're seeing some of the ability that he has. And listen, I know I started this conversation by talking about not getting too excited about what's happening in OTAs. However, the one caveat I always say is when it comes to the passing game and what's happening on the perimeter, that's legitimate. That stuff translates, okay? And I remember, I mean, you can tell during practice, what's going on the outside on the perimeter. That stuff is pretty much what they're going to be doing on Sundays, right? So Rocky Sin is another guy. Like the way he practiced this summer, that kid's going to be legitimate. Like he's got real tools, and I think he's going to put some pressure on Matt Eberflus and that defensive staff to get him on the field. I don't know how they're going to do it and how the combinations are going to work, but that kid deserves to play. So, yeah, I think what, as it relates to Parris Campbell, I think it's all legitimate, and I think we can take a lot away from what he's done so far.
All right, this was the off-season of the extension. What do those conversations sound like? What potentially do those numbers or opportunity look like for guys like T.Y. Hilton and Anthony Costanzo?
Yeah, well, I think with Costanzo, I'll start with him. He's an interesting one because of the point of his career he's in. I think he's 30 years old now. But what I would say is that I haven't seen a decline. I have not seen any indication that he's not the same guy. He's also been durable. I know he missed 5 games, I believe, last year with the, I think, hamstring injury. But I can live with a guy missing time because of a hamstring. I mean, that's not necessarily an indication that a guy's old. It's when the body starts breaking down and you're starting to have, knees and things of that nature. That's when you've got issues. That's when I start to worry about age. A pulled hamstring for a guy who never misses a game, I don't necessarily look at that as an indicator. But the question then is, you're not going to sign to a 5-year deal, right? So, I mean, I think it's got to be a question, what's reasonable, what does he want, and what do the Colts consider reasonable? Are we talking 2-3 years? I think that's probably the mindset, and I think you probably front load that thing. Now, he probably have mixed feelings about a front-loaded contract because that makes him cuttable. It makes him expendable towards the end of the contract. But if you're the team with an older player, you want to protect yourself, and I think that's the way to do it. But they have so much money, or they have at least enough money, that they can front load a deal and certainly make him happy on opening day if they choose to do that. I think he's the guy they're targeting. There's going to be another one or two extensions. At least they're going to make a run at another couple of extensions. And I think Anthony's on that list. For T.Y., there's not as much urgency because obviously he's not in a contract year. But I'm telling you, I mean, there's really no reason not to at least have the conversation right now, right? Especially because the line of guys, the number of guys in line for extensions is quite long, and the bigger deals are the ones that are still coming. I know they've done a couple, but those pale in comparison to the ones they're going to have to do. So maybe it makes more sense to do T.Y. now. So we'll have to see how that goes. That's a more complicated conversation, obviously.
My friend, enjoy that remaining downtime you've got. We'll see you in a couple of weeks out in Westfield.
All right, man. Looking forward to it.
You got it. Stephen Holder again on the Payless Liquors hotline. Catch his great work at theathletic.com.
Yeah, the biggest question